Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Can a referee in a soccer game, be too close to the action and therefore make the wrong decision? It was just 6 minutes into a soccer game when referee Darren England, he had to come to a quick conclusion. One player, Nathaniel Chalobah, had made a rush towards his opponent, bringing him down to the ground in pain. Such an attack would have warranted an instant red card. Chalobah would have to leave the ground and his team would be a player short, and this would give a huge advantage to the opposing team. However, the referee let the game go on. After all, it seemed like he was close enough to judge what was going on the field. As it turns out, he was too close. A referee tends to make better decisions when he's about 11 to 15 yards away. Because of the intense studies made on referees, we know that the referee needs to be some distance away. Yet this fact isn't blindingly obvious to begin with. A similar problem lies when we look at people who are successful at what they do. We tend to think that it's often to do with their strengths or their weaknesses. However, there is a blindingly obvious reason why people get successful. It's also the reason why you do extremely well in some areas but fail miserably at others. Like always, we'll cover 3 topics, and today it's about mastery versus ego orientation, the problem with embarrassment, and how to keep that confidence strong. And remember, we're talking about success. How do people get successful? Not surprisingly, it's all in your head. Let's start out with the mastery versus ego orientation. In 2021, my friend Doug gave me his camera, his Leica camera, for a month. If you're not familiar with Leica, you would not have realized they're very expensive cameras. Most of them cost upwards of $6,500 US, and some of them sell for well over $20,000 to $30,000. To simply loan a camera like that would be a big leap of faith, and more so for Doug because he's especially fussy with his cameras or everything in general. But I was very excited. I had a Leica, and having got the camera, I decided to take pictures indoors. I'd take a few pictures, send it to Doug, and then I'd wait for his response. Out of focus, he'd say to me, so I'd take some more pictures. I'd send them across through Messenger, and he'd come back. Out of focus, out of focus, out of focus. These were the responses I got almost all day long. The weird bit about this focus problem was that the camera wasn't a manual camera. It was autofocus. All I had to do was point and shoot. Even so, I was getting the focus all wrong, and I was getting increasingly frustrated with the camera. At this point, would you have given up? It all depends on why you do what you do, says Dr. Gio Valiente. If you want to find out who's going to meet with success and who's going to quit, you need to go back to the reason why they're doing the activity at all. At first, all activities are fun, but sooner or later things go wrong. Even so, some people don't give up. The reason, says Dr. Valiente, is the difference between mastery and ego. The people who are mastery-oriented are focused on their own level of improvement. When they fail, they don't necessarily give up. Instead, they get curious. They want to know more about how others have overcome the same problem. This spurs them to keep attacking the issue until they have the answer to the problem, or at least a part of the answer that moves them forward. And then we have the ego-oriented person who is also curious, but the motivation can be quite different. If you ask an ego-oriented person the reason why they do something, Their answers are slightly varied, but they sound a bit like this. I want to beat other people. I want to prove a point. I want to show them that I'm good at what I do. I want to win the trophy. Invariably, all of us are hit by failure. However, when the ego-oriented person fails, they don't tend to bounce back with curiosity. Instead, they're embarrassed. Knowingly or unknowingly, they got started because they wanted to prove their worth, and then things start to go south. When they reach this point, their normal reaction is embarrassment. And this concept of embarrassment, it drops us quite suddenly into the second point, which is why is embarrassment so deadly for us? Did I say deadly for us? Yes, it is frustrating for most of us, but even so for someone who is ego-oriented. Let's find out why. Humiliation is second only behind grief, says Valiente. When a child or a loved one dies, there's intense grief. You shut down and you can't think of anything else. Right behind all of that grief is another emotion. It's called humiliation. Humiliation or embarrassment is such an overpowering emotion that when things go wrong, all you tend to see is an attack. Just like grief, you shut down. You don't want to continue on the path that you've set on. Many of us have had this feeling of threat and embarrassment, often as children. My sister-in-law must have been about 7 years old at school. In her drawing class, they had to do an assignment. However, later the teacher held up her artwork and, without mentioning anyone's name, said, "Who did this rubbish?" From that moment on, my sister-in-law decided that drawing was not her forte. It was not her strength. It was always going to be her weakness. She felt that she was not born to draw, and it was better to just abandon the idea of drawing. And we know that this level of embarrassment is so great because she remembers that story years, decades later. That one story keeps rattling around in her brain. Today, she's an accomplished artist that turns out splendid work. At one point, she believed in strengths and weaknesses, and now she knows that there is a system and there's the teacher, and you can get to wherever you want to go. But the embarrassment still remains. As a child, you want to be accepted by your teacher, by your parent, by your friends, by everybody around you, and you're driven very largely by the ego orientation. But as an adult, that has shifted. The trajectory has moved. When she makes a mistake, there is no embarrassment. There's just curiosity. Yes, it's a goof up. Yes, things are going wrong. But how do we fix it? Some people struggle to get out of this ego orientation. And this is why, when they are faced with difficulty, they just give up. A similar sort of ego plays itself out in the many courses that we conduct at Psychotactics. It's not unusual for a client to say, their work is so much better than mine. They draw cartoons better than I do. They write articles that are far more evocative than mine. These are all ideas driven by ego, by wanting to prove that somehow we need to be in a different place. The gap between who we are and who we want to be is so great that we are embarrassed. The humiliation could wash over us like wave after wave until we feel destroyed. However, if we approach the very same task with a mastery attitude, we simply get curious. And then we want to learn how to surf over those waves that are causing such a nightmare. We somehow need to keep the confidence strong. How do we do that? This takes us to the third part, which is keeping the confidence strong. We started out this podcast with mastery versus ego orientation. We then moved on to this bone-crushing, brain-tormenting embarrassment factor that makes us feel terrible. But the third thing is, how do we recover from it? Because we're all ego-driven. We wake up in the morning and we think of how we're going to do something so that we can get something. We want people to appreciate us. So how do we get over this big problem that is not going to go away? Let's find out in the third part on keeping this confidence strong. Remember the camera story? I got the camera from Doug and took those pictures and they were all out of focus. Did I give up or am I still taking photos? You probably know the answer already, but there is a way that I got my confidence back. I didn't start out trying to take some amazing photos. I was just trying to take any photos so that I could get control of the camera. But at some level, I still wanted Doug to say, oh, wow, these are amazing photos. These are astounding photos. So there was a very huge portion of me that wanted to get that praise. It was driven by ego. But if you're asking me, I'm still going to deny it. I'm still going to say, no, I had the mastery factor in place. I wanted to master it. I was curious. And we all know that this is not entirely true, that at least part of us wants to fix things, but the other part of it wants to praise. So the way out of this hole is to stop forcing yourself to get everything right. Instead, you prioritize on getting 80% of the activity wrong. As weird as it sounds, this crazy method causes the ego to make a quick exit. Instead of taking every picture in focus, I moved towards getting just 2 out of 10 in focus. In short, I was going to give myself the task of taking mostly fuzzy pictures. In the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, another sports psychologist and trainer, W. Timothy Galway, brings up the story of a woman. She came to him with a tennis problem. She thought, this is a serious problem. I'm not getting it fixed. I don't know what to do. She used to play mixed doubles with her husband and some friends, and she was very embarrassed because instead of the ball hitting the strings, it always seemed to hit the frame of the racket. No matter how hard she tried, she almost always got it wrong. W. Timothy Galway asked her to focus on the frame instead. The instruction was to make sure that she hit the ball with the frame of the racket. Not with the strings, but the frame. He told her to focus on that bit, and as you'd expect, something weird started to unfold. Time and time again, the ball didn't hit the frame, but went flying off the strings. He was telling her to get it wrong, she was getting it right. It's bizarre, doesn't it? But when we're relaxed and we're not focusing on trying to be the best that we can, we do things differently. The brain takes over, the embarrassment disappears, and we do a pretty good job. Is it the best job ever? No, of course not. You're not in the game to be the best. In some areas, you have the luxury of rankings. You can tell that a tennis player is number one or that you get the highest marks in the exam. However, you can't measure which cook is better or whether one podcaster is vastly better than another. And as a podcaster, I know, because I used to make hundreds of mistakes all the time, but my goal was just to get 2 out of 10 things right. And if you listen to some of the podcasts, they were so horrible at the beginning that, wait a second, you won't think they're horrible because you don't know how many mistakes I made. I do, but you don't. And that's the whole point. The point is that even when that woman was hitting the frame, the ball was going across the net. She was embarrassed. Her ego was involved. But the ball was still going across the net. In fact, I'm sure she got a lot of points because the ball would go in some crazy direction. The point that 2 sports psychologists and me, the podcaster, is trying to make is that you're going to make mistakes. So why not give yourself some leeway and make those mistakes? Have a quota of mistakes 6 out of 10, 8 out of 10, and that takes the ego out of the equation. You stop saying things like, I want to be a perfectionist. You stop saying things like that because you know you're going to get 6 out of 10 wrong. And somehow the brain doesn't cooperate. Even when you're trying to get things wrong, it gets it right. And in the process, the ego is out of the equation because you're trying so hard to get things wrong. You're trying to master getting things wrong, and you get them right. Success is a weird term. Everybody has a different description of success. However, at some level, we all seek to get better, a lot better. Some people never make it because they're more focused on what others think. Their ego drives them over that metaphorical cliff, and they can't recover easily. Since humiliation is so intense an emotion, it might seem like there's no way out, and yet there is. Instead of trying to get most things right, your goal should be to get, at least at the beginning, to get many things wrong. Unless you're flying a plane, getting 80% of things wrong or 60%, it's a good goal to go for. It doesn't affect you that much. Your brain relaxes, the embarrassment slips out of the door, and that is when you get ahead. And that brings us to the end of this podcast, and I know you noticed it because we just did the summary. But what's the one thing that you can do today? I think the one thing that you can do today is to keep a quota of the things that you're allowed to get wrong. If you're going to make a dish today, maybe give yourself a 50% chance of getting it wrong. This is what I did when I started to make biryani. I had all of these elements and so many ingredients. Sometimes you have like 30 ingredients in a biryani, which is a rice dish. And I will focus this week on getting the rice correct and everything else wrong. And of course it went wrong because it's a difficult dish to make. And then the next week I'd focus on a second thing and try to get that right, and I didn't care about the rest. And so on it went, Sunday after Sunday for 6 weeks before I got the whole biryani right. And this is kind of how you do it. You focus on little things, and then you're not embarrassed. You don't go around saying, oh, my biryani is so not so good. It's just average. I don't know if you like it. No. You go, I got 70% of the biryani wrong, but this part, the rice, it's cooked perfectly. Or this part, the fried onions, they're cooked perfectly. And that's how you go about it. Takes the embarrassment out of the picture and makes you a master. And on that very happy note, let's go and find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. Coming up very quickly in December is Suddenly Talented. What is Suddenly Talented? It's a book that I've been writing for close to 15 years. Why 15 years? Not because it took 15 years, but because, I don't have a good reason. Not a good reason at all. But it shows you a lot of these principles. It shows you why we think differently and therefore we don't achieve the goals that we've set out for ourselves, or even goals that we don't know that we can achieve. I never set out to be a podcaster. I'd never set out to do watercolors or be good at cooking. A lot of things that I can do today. And I talked to my wife about this. 10 years ago, I couldn't do at least half a dozen things that I could do that I can do today. And this is what the book is about. So if you go to psychotactics.com/talent, you'll find out that doable greatness is better than genius. Go there today and find out for yourself. And with that, I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye, and we'll see you in the membership site at 5000 BC. Still listening? About 10 years ago, my niece Marsha came over and we were mentoring her. She was having a lot of trouble with her spelling. And the way we went about it was to tell her to spell things wrong. So let's say she had to spell the word road and she spelled it as R-O-D-E. Well, I'd tell her the way to spell it is R-O-A-D. And then I'd say, now you have to get it wrong. You have to spell it as R-O-D-E. And she would try, but she would not succeed. Because the brain is very desperately trying to get things right. It's trying to fix the problem. And she would keep going to the correct spelling, which is R-O-A-D. R-O-A-D. And I would say, no, you have to get it wrong to get it right. Grudgingly, she'd do it, but she would not forget the spelling. We do the same thing on the headline course. We have a headline writing course sometimes, every year or two. And in one of those segments, you have to write the headline wrongly. And this removes all the ego, all the embarrassment, because you are being forced to do things wrongly. And so you can't get it right anyway, if you get what I mean. Yeah, I know. It's a mind twister. Don't think about it. Just get 50% wrong. And I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.